One of the things I get asked about quite a bit is how do I come up with my settings, for example, making these tiles. I do a lot of these. So I'm going to explain how I come up with my settings, and I'm going to use the Longer Ray5 laser right here, for example. Coming up. I'm Roger, welcome to the shop. We're going to talk about here today our laser settings, and in particular for the Longer Ray5, but it would apply to any laser. You're going to have to run some test patterns. And one of the things I always do with every new laser I get is I run a test pattern using the Nicky Norton white tile method on a ceramic tile and do a burn test when it's new. Whoop, that's not it. There we go, do a burn test when it's new. So then I have a baseline of how well it performs when it was new, and it's also a baseline, let's say 6 months down the road after it's had a lot of hours of use. I can run this again and find out how the laser head is holding up, if it's getting weaker or if it's holding its own. This one here, I have a lot of hours on this, and this is one that I ran just recently here, and it's I did it in August, and it is pretty much just like the new one was. I don't have the new one right here, but I had done the comparison back when I ran this. So a lot of people are having problems with, you know, in ceramic tiles, for example. Here's a couple of the coasters we do. But you need to run a test, and if you buy your tiles at, let's say, Home Depot, and you run some tiles on there and you run a test, and then, well, the next time you need tiles and Home Depot doesn't have any, so you go to, let's say, Lowe's, and you buy tiles there. They're not the same brand, or at least most likely they're not going to be. You need to run another test because the glazing and the compounds are going to be different. If you would happen to use different types of paint, if you use, I usually use Rust-Oleum white paint, and you need to have a paint with titanium dioxide. If you switch paints, your results are going to change. So you'll need to run a test every time. So we're going to get into a few of them here in a little bit. We'll do a tile, and then we'll do some stainless steel. But what I want to talk about next now is the wood. Okay, when it comes to wood, yeah, there's a lot of like test charts you can download and you can run, and if you're going to run a test chart on a 10-watt laser, make sure that test chart was made for a 10-watt laser, not for a 5-watt, or you're going to burn holes in your wood. And you might even make a fire, because 10-watt is quite a bit more powerful. And if you happen to be up to the 20-watt, make sure you have a test pattern made for a 20-watt, and definitely don't use one made for a 5-watt, or you will be burning through your material. So we're going to talk about wood here a little bit, and I save my scraps. And it's good to do burn tests on when I'm setting up something new. Now, something else you need to keep in mind, not every wood engraves the same. In fact, from batch to batch, especially on cedar, which we'll get to here in a minute, it's going to differ according to the wood grain and the moisture content and just all kinds of things. There's a lot of variables with cedar, but cedar is an excellent wood to use. I'm talking Western red cedar, not the Eastern white cedar, or aromatic cedar like you use in a cedar closet. Western red cedar, generally they make fence pickets out of it. That's what I buy to make our signs. So if you're going to do cutting, know the thickness of your material first, so you'll have a baseline to go by. This happens to be 3 millimeter here, and you can buy these little shapes at Dollar Tree for $1.25, and they're good to play with. It's also cheaper than buying a 3 millimeter wood at a hobby store. So if you're going to cut, and I'll get up a little closer here so you can see this. This is just a simple hexagon, and done with at 300 millimeters per minute, 100% power, 1 pass, 2 passes, 3 passes. That's on this particular brand of plywood. If you switch to a different brand, your results may be completely different. Now when you get into engraving, the type of wood and the pattern you have is going to make a difference. So here are some snowflakes. So here is 4,000 millimeters per minute, 80% power. Then we went 2,000 millimeters per minute, 80% power. then 1,000 millimeters per minute, 80% power. What effect do you want? What's the look you're looking for? Here is a fill at 3,000 millimeters per minute, 80%. And as you can see, if you compare, well, I guess I didn't do a 3,000 at 80 in a line, but this gives you some comparisons here on the different looks. This is also a fill at 5,000 millimeters per minute at 80%. So it's whatever look you're looking for. If you're making signs and you want something dark, you're definitely going to want something like this. If you're just doing lines, and scorching is going to make a difference, you don't want the 1,000 millimeters per minute. Maybe go to 1,500 or 2,000 millimeters per minute, or a slower speed at a slower speed at a lower power. So you need to make some tests. Now, if you switch over to a different type of wood, where here we have cedar, there's 3,000 millimeters per minute, 80%. I guess that would be a good one to compare this one to, because the one on your right there will be a fill and the one on the left is just a line. But as you can see, there's a great difference between the types of wood and how line engraves are going to look. So you'll need to run a test on your wood. For example, here too, when I did some, these are actually called honey dippers. And this was on a graphic I was doing, a custom graphic for someone. I did some tests on here on the cedar. This is 4,000 millimeters per minute at 80% power. This is 3,000 at 80% power. So you can see this one here is a little lighter, but it's not very deep. This one's quite a bit deeper and quite a bit darker. Now, how does that translate to another type of wood? Here's some plywood. Yep, upside down. So here, I needed to get a good baseline on what I could use when I put it onto wood. So my darkest engrave was 1,500 millimeters per minute, 80%. But I also got a good engrave at 3,000 millimeters per minute, 3,000 millimeters per minute at 90%. The 4,000 at 70% was just, it wasn't deep enough, it wasn't dark enough. This gave me a good dark engrave, and I did not get any scorching around the edge, because it was important that I didn't get any scorching on this one because of the other graphics that were on that particular sign. And this is exactly the wood I used. So any type of material you use, you need to do a test on it. Okay, next I want to give you a couple of examples of, even though you've done your tests and everything comes out perfect and you decided on what your settings are going to be, not everything works perfect every time. Wood can be fickle at times, especially when you're doing cutting. I've got a couple signs here that, I mean, this all looks great up here. The problem is, it didn't cut all the way through, right down here on just the edge of that one letter, and up here in a couple of the shapes in the spider web, which I will be able to fix with an X-Acto knife. I'll just get in there and cut the grain on the back, and then the rest will pop out. Had the same thing here on this one, and I'll get this, hopefully you can see this. Everything cut fine, except on the mouth of the pumpkin right here. I have a whole bunch of areas that did not cut out all the way. So otherwise, everything came out good on it. So that happens. So you can expect that. It's got to be something to do with the grain of the wood. And I've had this happen on many different types of plywood, not just this one. Okay, another little tip, if you're doing what I call an engraving over paint, where you put blue painter's tape over a painted piece of wood and then engrave it. Yes, it does engrave right through the tape, but you may need to make a little bit of adjustment either with your speed or your power. I'll give you an example of one of the signs we do here. This one has sawdust on it. I don't know how that could have happened. Need to get that cleaned off. But here I had to increase power by about 5% when I do these engravings, because this is covered with blue painter's tape after it's painted. Then I do the engrave, then I pull the tape back off. And you get the color on the back, and this is of course Halloween themed, but you kind of get the idea. You will need to make an adjustment with your power. Okay, my next little tip here on your settings. So on a sign like this, This is a line engraved down here. This is not fill. This is just line. So you'll need to get your settings for your line engraving, and this is this 1/4" plywood. It's underlayment plywood. Now for your fill, you need to have it deep enough so that it makes a nice dark engrave, but you don't want, of course, scorching on this one wouldn't have mattered because that's the whole theme of this. However, because of this font being large, I set this layer differently so that it would use a little bit less power than the smaller ones down here. Down here I needed a little bit more power to get it more clear, deep, dark, whatever you want to call it. And here again, now I have another font down on the bottom, which is a script font, so that one also has a little bit different power setting. So there again, take a scrap, do some samples of what you're going to do. You don't have to do great big things, and then run a couple tests on it. That way you'll have an idea of what you're doing, so once you do your project, you don't end up with a spoiled project and waste your time. So now we'll get into a couple of examples of some of the things I do here. We're going to do a ceramic tile, and where I'm going to do some stainless steel, and that part of the video was shot way before this one. Long story behind that, but at any rate, part of the audio is going to get a little flaky on one of them when we get into the ceramic tiles there, but it's still legible. So let's go with some ceramic tiles. We'll show you how we do that. Okay, the first thing we're going to do here is open up Lightburn. I'm going to be using Lightburn for this, and if you happen to have more than one laser, make sure you choose the right one. Longer Ray 5. Okay, the tile measures 4.25 square. So what I'm going to do is go up here and make a square. It can be any size. Then I'll go up here to unlock this little padlock. Change that to 4.25. Next one to 4.25. That'll give us our square. I'll relock that padlock. Go up here to select. Now go down here and make that a tool path. That way it doesn't engrave. It just gives us an outline of what we have. Next, I need to bring in my graphic. I'm going to be using a beer mug for this. So I'll be using this one right here. Obviously that's just like way too big. So I don't like to go right to the edges of the tile. So I'm going to make this 4 inches tall. Leave that padlock locked so that your proportions stay. That puts us here. I'll select this whole thing. And I will go up here and center it. So that puts us in the center. Give you a better look at it there. Over here for cuts. Of course, T1 is my tool path, so that does not engrave. So the next one is a line. I've got that referring back to that test tile. I want a dark line for the first layer, so I'm going 1500 millimeters per minute at 80% power. And then the second set of lines, which you see is kind of a pink color there. I'll blow this up a little better so you can see that. I want that to be just a little bit lighter, so I'm going to go 1750 millimeters per minute at 70% power. There's a close-up example of that Nicky Norton test tile, test burn you can do. And I do one of these for every one of my lasers. They're all different. Even though they may say they're all 10 watt, every one of them is going to burn different. Okay, so here we have the finished tile. Set it up there. Of course, that needs to be stripped now and have the paint taken off of it. Okay, it just so happens that these Folgers coffee containers do not react with acetone. They don't dissolve or anything. So I have some in there, and I can just put my tile down in there and let it soak for a little bit. Kind of see there. Let that soak till the paint bubbles up, And then I can take my rag and wipe it off. And I don't know if this will focus on that or not, but maybe you can see how that's all bubbled up and wrinkled. So now I can just take that out and wipe the paint off. And a lot of times you just take your fingers and scooch them around in there a little bit. Yes, I should have chemical gloves on, I know that. And if you happen to have any little remnants in there, you can use a rag. Just a little piece of Scotch-Brite. Make sure all the stuff is gone off of there. Let's take a towel. I'm using shop towels here. I said this is a defective tile, so that's why I was using this. It has a defect in it. And if you can't get everything off, you can always put a little bit of acetone on your rag, which I may need to do here because I've got a couple little spots. Now they all came off. So there's our finished tile, and as you can see, some of these lines here are a little bit lighter than the other ones. I wanted that for a contrast. That's why I did 2 different speeds on the different layers with different power settings. But otherwise, this turned out pretty good. Like I say, there's a little defect right there in the glazing. That's why I was using this for a test demonstration. This isn't something we would sell. So, what if you did an engrave? It's got a whole bunch of lines in it like this one here. This is the way it's supposed to look right here. As you can see, this one here has a bunch of lines in it. Here was the difference in when this happened. And I rarely ever use Wi-Fi to run a laser. I always direct connect, but I was in kind of a hurry, and one of them I didn't have a USB cable long enough to reach over from the computer I was using. So I ran one over Wi-Fi. Ended up with these lines. One of the problems we have in this area with Wi-Fi is we get interruptions, and when those interruptions happen, we get what's called drop packets. And it happens with printing. If you're just printing a common document, it's not a big deal. But if you're printing high quality graphics, or you're doing something that's important like this, you don't want them drop packets happening. And I don't know all the exact reasons why we have Wi-Fi interruptions around here. I know there's some interference when one certain person runs his lawn tractor, because that interrupts Wi-Fi all over the place here. He does not have a shielded ignition system or something. But that's where these lines came from. So if you're experiencing those lines and you're using Wi-Fi, try doing a direct connect. And one other little thing while we're on the subject of these tiles I want to add is, if you stripped your tile like I did by immersing it, which works fantastic, the back side of this will absorb some of that solvent. Be very careful where you lay this until all that solvent evaporates. Even though it may feel dry, there's residual solvent in there. If you lay that on something that has a finish, it's going to ruin it. So I usually lay mine on cardboard for like overnight or something before we put the cork backing on. So that's something to remember. If well, even when you're doing it by hand, some of that solvent can get into the back, and it is porous and it does absorb it, so you'll need to give it time for that to evaporate. I ruined the finish on one of our counters, that's how I know that. School of Hard Knocks. Okay, so that covered the ceramic tile in detail, because that is the one I get the most questions on. How do I know what the settings need to be to engrave these tiles? Especially if you're doing what they call a grayscale, where you're putting an actual photograph on there and etching that photograph into that white paint and then stripping it. That's a whole other process in how you set up the photograph. However, the same type of thing applies. You need to have a base mark from one of those test tiles of how black you want the black to be. And from there, that would be your, what I would call the 100% mark. So let's say the best thing on your tile, your test tile is like 1500 millimeters per minute at 80% power. When you set up to do the grayscale or dither that photograph onto the tile, 1500 millimeters per minute at 80% power would be your max setting, and let the base setting be, well, look at your tile again, find out what the lightest color is that actually still engraves, and use that for the lighter part. That's one way to do it. Now I could probably open up a can of worms there by saying that, but that's the way I do it. So your mileage may vary on that. Okay, so what about other materials? Wood, for example. This is Western red cedar. great thing to engrave on. And if you're just doing some practice and getting into this, go to your local home store and get a cedar fence picket. They're cheap. They're 1/2 inch thick. They're usually 6 foot tall. They're a nominal 5.5 wide. Of course, they'll be rough sawn. We use them for signs all the time, so I have a planer I run them through to just smooth them off. You can also sand them, or you can leave the rough on there if you like. It makes an interesting texture. There, you're going to have to do some tests. You know, take a little piece of it and do a few test burns. I know there's test charts you can do, but it's going to be different on every type of wood. So, you know, what I set here for doing this on cedar does not work on, let's say, white pine. And what I use on white pine does not come out the same on southern yellow pine. It's the same thing when you're cutting. You're going to have to do some tests with, you know, okay, it's 3mm plywood and, you know, it's 250 millimeters per minute, 100% power. One pass, that'll be good. Not necessarily. It depends on the plywood. And I tend to pick up a lot of the plywood shapes that they sell at Dollar Tree, because it's a cheap way to get thin plywood, and I can cut different things out of them. But from batch to batch to batch, there's always going to be something different, so you always need to do a test cut on the material you're using. I recently did a video here on making a Halloween sign using 1/4 inch plywood. Before I even started the first piece, I did a test cut on scrap I had, but that scrap was from a different sheet of plywood, and it burned and cut perfect. However, when I put my first piece on, it didn't come all the way through. I ended up having to add a pass to it. The core material was a little bit different. So you're going to have variances. Don't get frustrated. Okay, what about glass tiles? And by glass tiles, I mean the glass tiles you buy at the home store that have a white backing on them, intended to go on the wall. You'll need to do test engraves, and this is one of my little test tiles. And on the back side, after I do an engrave, on the back side I will write down speed, percentage of power, and in this case this is for the longer laser. And I have one of these for every laser, and I keep them kind of in a file pile, as I call it. I have a flat surface over there. I just stack these up, and when I need to go back and reference one of these, I also have a notebook I write this in. But this is quicker from my file pile. I can look at the back, look at the front. Okay, I like this one the best. 500 millimeters per minute, 100% power. Maybe I like this darker text over here, 1000 millimeters per minute, 100% power. So having those notes is important. Keep a record. Okay, what about stainless steel? Well, first, you won't engrave it, you'll etch it. The diamond laser does not engrave stainless steel, it etches it. And if you're going to be doing aluminum, it needs to be anodized or it needs to be coated. There's different types of coatings you can use on different metals. That's a whole other video subject too. But here, you're going to have to do some testing. For example, this is one of those little scrapers from Dollar Tree, about $1.25. Good to practice on, it's cheap. But the stainless steel you get from place to place, and they're not the same alloys. There's different amounts of nickel in them, and it's going to make a difference on your engrave. For example here, and we'll actually do a little test engrave here on this little stainless steel scraper. But the note I had here was at 450 millimeters per minute at 100% power. So I'll get all the graphics set up here and we'll do a little bit of a demo. If you're doing play with one of these scrapers, remember it has a rolled up edge, so you don't want your laser going back so far that it hits it. And you definitely need to set your focus. And different types of lasers have different methods. So here's my focus. I'll just do a little small test graphic here. I'm just doing my initials here. I'm going to make it rather small, so this will take so long to engrave. I got it set up here, so we'll frame this, make sure I'm going to be on my work. Everything looks good there. 450 millimeters per minute, 100% power. And that is on this Dollar Tree scraper. Something else I should add is make sure you wear your goggles, because this is highly reflective material and you can damage your eyes. And so there's a finished piece. Got my initials on it. This is permanent, will not wash off. And dishwasher safe, it says so right over here. So here it is, and as I said, it came out perfect. And this is a great thing to purchase to practice on when you're starting to work with stainless steel and your laser. These are cheap, and you're not investing a bunch of money in things. Just remember, if you're engraving with this curled side up, to allow for the travel so you don't run into it, move your project. Back side is simple, just turn it over, put a piece of wood underneath to elevate a little bit, of course set your focus accordingly. So I hope you got a little something out of this. Again, we had a lot of questions, especially the ceramic tiles, on how to get the proper engraving settings. Again, do your own test, every laser is different. Again, I've done this on every one of my lasers. I have several 10-watt lasers. Every one of them gives me a different test pattern. By a little bit, but that little bit can make a difference in your finished project. So there's how I determine my settings for whatever project I'm doing. I always take a little scrap and run some tests first. Just a letter. A lot of times I just use my initials, like I did on that little Dollar Tree stainless steel scraper. And by the way, that's a great thing to practice on if you're just getting into doing stainless. So if you got anything out of this, appreciate getting a thumbs up. Always helps the channel. I'm having a bad hair day, hence the hat. Of course, we're always looking for subscribers. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.